I've played many games over the past 15 years. I like discovering new experiences, and usually when I finish the main story of a single player game, I'll never go back to it. Maybe if I really enjoyed a game, I'll replay it a few years down the line, and then I'll once again won't touch it for a lot of time. There is one exception to this however, and that of course was Elden Ring. Not only did I beat this game once, but I immediately went back and did that 2 more times. I'll discuss why I did that a bit later, but the point is that I loved Elden Ring when it released. With its DLC coming out in just a few weeks, I decided to do a fresh playthrough of the game to see how it holds up 2 years after its release. So join me in my adventure through the lands between to answer the question of whether Elden Ring is still a masterpiece. Let's check it out. So, the story of Elden Ring is that you're a person that gains the ability to infinitely respawn. Using that power, you go on a journey to become the Elden Lord, whatever that is, and slay everything that stands in your way. I'm gonna be honest with you, I have no idea what's going on. FromSoft games have always had very cryptic storytelling, and funnily enough, Elden Ring is one of the least cryptic games of their catalog. Even such, you still have to do a lot of the legwork to piece things together. I've never done this, and as I assume many of you do, I just wait for the Vati videos to explain everything in a coherent manner. Even though I have no idea what's going on, I still love how much of a story the places you visit themselves can tell. The enemies you fight, the architecture, and even the color scheme of each place can give you very good insight of how that place looked years before you even got there. I'm a big fan of this type of storytelling because it's not only something that could only happen in a game, but it allows you to learn as much or as little as you want about it. Even though I adore the atmosphere of each Souls game, I much more prefer getting to the next boss fight than reading item descriptions. And the game allows me to not care about the story. I say this because I feel like some games refuse to allow you to interact with just their gameplay. Spider-Man 2018 interrupts you every few missions so you can play as MJ or Miles. Assassin's Creed Black Flag constantly gives you annoying tailored missions, and any Borderlands game stops you right in your tracks so you can listen to some of the dialogue. It might seem like a small thing, but the fact that Elden Ring gives me the freedom to just play it is something that has a genuinely positive impact on the entire experience. In regards to gameplay, Elden Ring has 2 main pillars, bosses and exploration. Bosses are the thing that kept me coming back to the game. Their design is definitely not perfect, but once you understand the boss's moveset, some fights can become something akin to a dance where you artfully dodge all your opponent's moves and counter them just at the right time. It never fails to give me a rush of adrenaline, and it's something that very few other games can achieve. However, I do have some problems with the boss design in this game, and one of those is entirely my fault. You see, especially when I'm playing a FromSoft game, I have a tendency of hitting my head against a brick wall, even though I'm clearly underleveled for a specific boss fight. I will keep trying until I finally manage to beat it, or else it will be the only thing I think about while playing the game. I don't know if there's a psychological term for it, and I'm sure there is, but I like to call it taking it personally. For example, when the game first came out, I spent 5 hours on pre-nerf Radahn at level 40, playing in the worst possible way just so I could have a chance at defeating him. Elden Ring bosses, however, do not like that mentality. They will mercilessly beat you until you go back out to the world and explore. And that's what the devs want you to do. They want you to explore this beautiful and dense world, and your reward for that is getting enough souls and experience to defeat the next boss standing in your way. But this becomes a problem on repeat playthroughs. On my latest run, I noticed that the world felt less like something I should explore and more like a momentum killing checklist. The lands between are filled with dungeons, but some of them are a complete must for a better experience within the game, and some of them feel completely useless but for a small number of builds. And I say momentum killing because sometimes all I want to do is fight the bosses and nothing else. And this is something that you can practically do in all other Souls games but Elden Ring. This playthrough made me have a lot more mixed feelings toward the open world of the game. On the one hand, it made for an unforgettable first playthrough where I explored as much as I could and discovered so many interesting places and scenarios. On the other hand, it kind of bogged down the experience that I want from a Souls game. The open world in Elden Ring is an interesting double-edged sword, and I don't know which side is better. I think it depends on what you want out of a game. If you're looking for replayability, the other Souls games' tighter structure is definitely a better model to follow, but if you're looking for one amazing playthrough, then Elden Ring's way is better. Elden Ring is simultaneously the easiest and hardest Souls game. I think it's the easiest because you can grind to beat every boss barring a few endgame ones, and it's the hardest because the bosses here have the most complicated movesets in the entire franchise. Elden Ring bosses sometimes make Dark Souls bosses look like unfinished demos. Most bosses in this game are insanely agile, have varying delays on their attacks, and for I believe the first time ever in a From Software game, they bait you into thinking that their attack is over, only for you to attack and have a 7-hit combo unleashed on you. While I don't have an issue with the movesets themselves, I think from a certain point onwards, bosses do too much damage. And not just their heavy attacks, but every little motion they do as well. Due to that, Vigor becomes a crutch. Regardless of whether you're a sorcerer, a dexterity build, or a pure strength one, every build needs to upgrade Vigor. My problem with this is if every build needs to upgrade a certain stat, maybe that stat's effect needs to be reduced. Even with Vigor being a crutch, the game offers great build variety, and there is no end to what builds you can make. But I think that even more variety could exist if players didn't have to worry about having to get Vigor to a certain level. My solution for this would be to follow the examples set by other RPGs, where health is automatically raised by you leveling up. Or you could maybe make health a collectible to be found in the world, like the golden seeds are used to raise the amount of healing flasks you have. This obviously can't be implemented in Elden Ring right now, as I suspect the devs have made the leveling system with the knowledge that players will inevitably upgrade Vigor, but I don't see why a potential sequel couldn't or shouldn't implement these changes. This could also help calibrate the damage bosses do, as right now I'm guessing that From Software had to account for players having a varying amount of health when entering these fights. For that reason, sometimes fights felt easy and others felt very hard. It's very challenging to fine-tune the difficulty of your game when you don't know how much or how little players will have explored before entering a boss fight. And for the player himself, it is also difficult to gauge if he is under, over, or just correctly leveled for a fight. Sometimes a victory will feel cheap if you demolish a boss's health bar, which is bound to happen at some point during a playthrough. When I'm talking about boss fights, I'm referring to the main boss fights found in the game's main dungeons like Radahn or Godric. The game, however, does feature a variety of smaller dungeons, and almost each and every one of them features a boss fight at the end, which is usually a reskin of a boss found in the open world, or a beefed up normal enemy. While I'm not the biggest fan of this, it is understandable, as the game features so much content that repetition was bound to happen. The only exception to this is fighting the Godskin duo in Farm Azula, where the fight not only feels unfair, but it is also a reskin of two separate fights that happened in the open world. Elden Ring is an open world game through and through. I want to make it clear that despite its flaws, I still very much enjoy this game. Any game that you can play for 20 hours and feel like you haven't even scratched its surface without any predatory tactics is definitely worthy of a lot of praise, and I feel as if a lot of the game's flaws are not so much due to From Software's poor design decisions, but they are inherent issues of the genre that the developers chose. If you remove the Elden Ring related vocabulary I used in this video, I could be describing the problems of any open world game. It's just that Elden Ring is the one open world game that I want to keep replaying, despite it not being the easiest thing to do so. And that was my analysis of Elden Ring. If you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing as it's free and it helps the channel out immensely. See you in the next one.